They tried to sell him like property. But one silent truth in his past had the power to burn the entire city to the ground, a truth no chain could hold. The morning that would carve itself into the memory of New Orleans began with a strange kind of silence. Not a gentle silence, but a heavy, expectant one, the kind that settled over a city before something unforgettable happens. Dawn crept across the Mississippi River, dragging streaks of orange and gray across the water, and for reasons none of the early risers could explain, people found themselves drifting toward the auction square long before the bell rang. Fog curled lazily around the wooden stalls. The air smelled of damp rope, spilled molasses, and the faint sweetness of magnolia blossoms drifting from some distant garden. Horses snorted restlessly, sensing the unease that their riders did not yet understand. Merchants paused in the middle of setting up their carts. Housewives, normally busy with morning chores, walked slower than usual, their hearts tugging them toward the center of the square. Something was about to happen, something the city would never forget, and when the crowd saw him, the young man standing on the auction block, all breath left the air, he didn't look like the others brought before the city that day. He didn't carry the bowed shoulders of someone broken by chains, nor the expressionless mask of a person who had accepted a fate he never chose. He stood still, tall, perfectly composed, though iron circled his wrists. Dust clung to his bare feet. His skin glowed a soft golden hue under the rising sun. His hair, dark and slightly curled, fell just above his shoulders. His facial features, sharp yet gentle, didn't belong to suffering. They belonged to stories whispered in poems, to portraits in noble estates, to a world far from this dirt-covered platform. But it was his eyes that silenced the square, eyes that carried storms, eyes that carried distance, eyes that carried a secret so vast it made some people step back without knowing why. The auctioneer, a man named Barnaby Finch, cleared his throat. Finch was known throughout Louisiana for his booming voice and cruel efficiency, but that morning he seemed off balance. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the ledger. He kept glancing over his shoulder at the man behind him, as if afraid to turn his back for too long. "Ladies and gentlemen," Finch began, but his voice cracked. He coughed, annoyed at himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, this is a unique specimen." A murmur broke out, not cruel laughter, not mocking, just confusion, curiosity, because nobody in the crowd knew where this man came from. He was not listed on any plantation record. He was not marked with any brand. His clothing, what little remained, did not match those of local farms or estates, and the chains on his wrists looked newly forged, as if placed on him in haste. "What's his name?" someone demanded. Finch hesitated, a rare hesitation for a man so accustomed to lies. "What's your name, boy?" he barked, turning to the young man. The youth lifted his head slowly, as if weighing the consequences of speaking. A soft breeze brushed against his face, carrying the distant scent of sea salt from the river. His lips parted. "Elijah, just Elijah," but the name settled into the air like a promise. A few of the women in the crowd, dressed in fine fabrics and holding lace fans, exchanged glances. The way he said it, not quite timid, not defiant, but with quiet dignity, as if it were not simply a name, but a story he refused to let go of. "Elijah what?" someone else asked. Elijah's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Finch slammed his book shut. "Doesn't matter," he answers to Elijah. That's all anyone here needs, but the crowd didn't agree, because Elijah didn't look like someone whose identity could be dismissed so easily. A tall officer riding horseback leaned forward. "Where'd he come from, Finch?" "He ain't from here." Finch licked his lips nervously. "Found him near the port. Shipwreck survivor, most likely. Then how's he enslaved?" Another man shouted. "Shipwrecked doesn't mean owned. Whose name is he under?" "Where's his bill of sale?" Finch's face reddened. "Don't ask questions you don't need answers to." The crowd muttered again, this time with suspicion. Auctions were cruel, but they followed rules. Even the wealthiest buyers wouldn't take a slave whose origins were uncertain. A man without records could mean trouble, lawsuits, scandals, and in a city of old money and fragile reputations, scandal was often worse than crime. Elijah didn't move, he didn't blink. He let them stare, let them question, let their unease grow, yet never revealed what lived behind those calm eyes. Something flickered across his expression. Fear, no, not quite. More like calculation, as if he were silently mapping the faces in the crowd, storing names, searching for something or someone, because Elijah wasn't looking for freedom. He was looking for a secret, a truth buried beneath the city's cobblestones, a truth that could destroy everything, a truth only he carried. The crowd began to shift uneasily. Some people, without knowing why, felt the urge to step closer to him. Others stepped away, as if the mere presence of this stranger threatened to unravel something inside them. Among them stood a young woman who would one day rewrite Elijah's destiny, Claire Beaumont. Her pale blue dress fluttered at her ankles as she moved quietly at the edge of the gathering. Unlike the others, she wasn't there to buy, trade, or judge. She had simply been walking past on her way to deliver medicine to a sick worker at her father's estate. But when she saw Elijah, the world around her dimmed. She couldn't look away. No, she recognized something in him, a strangeness she couldn't name, an echo of something she didn't yet understand. Elijah's gaze drifted through the crowd, not pleading, not searching for mercy, until it landed on her. Their eyes met, and in that brief, fragile moment, Claire felt something shift beneath her ribs. It wasn't attraction, it wasn't pity, it was recognition. But how could she recognize a stranger she had never met? She lowered her eyes quickly, her heart thundering. She felt foolish, overly sensitive, yet she couldn't shake the sensation that she had seen those eyes before, not in person, not in dreams, not in portraits, but somewhere deeper, somewhere her memory couldn't reach. Finch lifted his cane and tapped it sharply on the wooden platform. Let the bidding begin. A silence fell, not of excitement but of hesitancy. People did not trust this auction. They didn't trust Finch, his shaky voice. They didn't trust the young man's quiet dignity, but desire outweighed caution. $100. Someone shouted. $120. $150. The numbers climbed fast, too fast, higher than what most would pay for a field laborer, even a strong one. Yet this wasn't about labor. It was about possession, about owning someone who didn't look like they could be owned. Young women whispered behind fans. Married men clenched their fists. Hide jealousy they couldn't explain. Servants glanced at each other, fear rising in their chests. Claire stayed silent, though her hands trembled. The bidding soared past 200, then 3, then 4. Finch could hardly keep up, but Elijah didn't flinch at the numbers assigned him. His breaths were steady, each inhale and exhale deliberate, as if he were practicing control, as if he were reminding himself that no matter the outcome, his name, his real name, would remain untouched by their greed. A wealthy man with a white beard raised his hand. 600. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire's father, Augustus Beaumont, stepped forward then, his expression one of irritation. He hadn't planned to be there that morning, but the commotion had drawn him from his carriage. He studied Elijah the way a businessman studies a rare investment. His eyes narrowed, calculating. 700. Augustus said calmly. More gasps. Even Finch stared at him. Augustus Beaumont wasn't known for impulse purchases. He bought carefully, strategically, often quietly. The fact that he offered such a high price meant one of two things. Either Elijah was unlike anything he had seen before, or Augustus intended to hide something. Elijah's eyes flicked toward him, a single flicker of recognition, or perhaps dread. No one could tell. 700 going once. Finch cried eagerly. A moment of hesitation spread like smoke. No other bidder moved, going twice. Claire's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. She wanted to shout something, what, she didn't know, but she felt the wrongness settling over the square like a storm cloud. Sold. Finch slammed his cane down. The sound echoed against the wooden stalls. Elijah was sold. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring excitedly, confusedly, nervously. The morning that began with silence now buzzed with rumors. Never seen a man like that. Looked too proud to be in chains. Where's he from? What's he hiding? Did you see his eyes? As the workers moved forward to remove Elijah's chains, Claire remained frozen in place. Her breath grew shallow. Elijah was being led toward her father's carriage, and when he passed by her, something happened. He turned his head just slightly and spoke so softly only she could hear. You've seen me before. Her lips parted. No, I haven't. But even she didn't believe her own words. Elijah's gaze held hers for a fraction of a second, a gaze heavy with meaning, haunted with memory. Not with your eyes, he whispered, with your heart. Then he was pulled away by the guards, leaving Claire trembling, her mind unraveling with questions she didn't have the courage to ask. As Elijah stepped into the carriage, the morning sun caught the edge of the iron cuffs still around his wrists. The light glinted sharply like the edge of a blade, and in that glint was a warning, a secret, a truth, a storm coming. Because Elijah was not what New Orleans believed him to be. He was not a slave. He was not a runaway. He was not a nameless body to be owned. He was a man stolen from a life the city could not imagine. A man whose identity, if revealed, would shatter the fragile structures of power built along Mississippi. A man whose arrival in New Orleans was not an accident, but the beginning of an impossible truth that threatened those who had built their wealth on silence and blood. As the carriage wheels began to turn, carrying Elijah toward the Beaumont estate and into a future he never chose, a soft wind brushed across the square. It carried one message. The city believed it had bought a man, but in truth, it had purchased a secret that would one day set fire to its lies. The Beaumont estate stood like a quiet kingdom on the edge of New Orleans, a place where iron gates creaked in the wind, magnolia branches stretched out like open arms, and the wide verandas held the long, heavy silence of a family that spoke more in reputation than in words. It was to this place Elijah was brought after the auction, to this place where the truth of his past would begin to tremble awake, to this place where a young woman would look past chains and see something no one else dared to see. The carriage ride from the square had been long and unnervingly silent. The guards spoke little, and Augustus Beaumont, Claire's father, stared out the window with a face carved from stone. Elijah kept his gaze lowered, but his mind was elsewhere, tracing memories he wished he could lose and truths he wished he could speak. The estate gates finally opened with a groan, and the horses trotted onto the long gravel path leading to the mansion. Sunlight peeked through the trees, landing in broken patterns over Elijah's hands that twitched as if longing for something familiar, something free, something stolen. Claire watched from her balcony. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her father expected her to be in the East Wing reviewing supplies for the upcoming harvest or assisting their house physician in tending to sick workers. But she couldn't, not after the auction, not after the way Elijah's eyes had met hers. A stranger's eyes should not have felt familiar, yet they had. She leaned forward, fingers gripping the railing, breath tight in her throat. The carriage stopped. The guard stepped down first, then Augustus, then Elijah. As his feet touched the ground, Claire felt the world blur for a moment. His presence changed the air around him, not by force, but by truth. He did not look like someone who belonged under someone else's command. He looked like someone who remembered what it meant to stand tall. Claire ducked behind the balcony pillar before her father could notice her watching. She felt foolish, heart pounding like a child caught spying on secrets she didn't understand. But she couldn't help it. Something about Elijah pulled her, and she wasn't alone. Servants watched from doorways, whispering quietly. Field workers glanced sideways, their expressions a mix of awe and caution. Even the overseer's hardened men who rarely reacted to anything looked unsettled. Elijah was not what the estate expected, not what the city expected, not what Augustus expected, but everything, it seemed, was changing. Elijah was taken to the rear quarters where new workers were usually examined, a small room with wooden shelves, a wash basin, and faint traces of herbs and medicine lingering in the air. Claire often worked there with the physician, preparing tinctures and stitching wounds. She didn't expect to find Elijah sitting on the wooden bench when she entered quietly a few minutes later. He looked up, and for the second time that day, the world shifted between them. "You," she whispered before she could stop herself. He stood, though his wrists still bore the faint red marks of recently removed chains. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness, no fear. Only recognition, the same recognition she had felt earlier. "I knew you would come," Elijah said softly. Claire froze. "Why would you think that?" "Because you looked at me and saw more than what was put in front of you." She should have stepped back. She should have called for assistance. She should have remembered the rules between master and servant, between owner and owned, between free and bound. But none of those rules felt real at that moment. "What are you?" she whispered, then flushed with shame. "I mean, who are you?" Elijah lowered his gaze. "A man with a name I cannot use, a past I cannot tell." "Not yet." His voice carried exhaustion, but also an undertone of something else, resistance. Claire took a hesitant step closer. "My father, he bought you. I didn't want, I know." Elijah said gently. "How can you know that?" "Because you didn't look at me like they did," he answered. "They saw price, they saw power, you saw truth." Her heart struck against her ribs. It was foolish, too fast, too soon, but she felt something tightening inside her chest. "Why did you say I've seen you before?" Claire asked. He lifted his eyes again. The softness in them startled her. "Because you have," Elijah said, "not your mind, your heart." Her breath caught. He continued, "Some people carry pieces of each other across lives they don't remember. Some souls are drawn before the eyes understand why." Claire's fingers trembled. "You speak like a scholar, not like a slave." Elijah finished, not with bitterness but honesty. She nodded slowly. Elijah stepped back, giving her space, a gesture of respect, unusual for someone supposedly beneath her. "I was born free," he whispered, "free in ways that frightened powerful men." "Where?" Claire asked, voice barely audible. Elijah hesitated. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened with memory. "And then not here," he answered. "Not anywhere near this life you know." Before Claire could speak again, the door swung open. Augustus Beaumont entered. His eyes flicked between the... Elijah standing respectfully, Claire standing too close. Something sharp, suspicious, glinted in his gaze. "Claire," he said with forced calm, "this is not your place right now." She stepped back quickly. "Father, I was just... You were doing something I did not ask you to do," Augustus said. "Leave." Elijah lowered his head, masking the anger that burned beneath his skin. Claire wanted to say more. She wanted to defend him. She wanted to question her father, but obedience was stitched into her upbringing like thread through fabric. Her father ruled with quiet authority, not cruel, but firm and never questioned. "Yes, father," she whispered. She slipped out of the room, but not before she stole one last glance at Elijah. His eyes met hers again, steady, understanding, unbroken, and Claire felt something awaken inside her that she hadn't felt in years, a courage she didn't know she possessed. The days that followed were quiet on the surface but restless beneath. Elijah was assigned minimal tasks at first, not out of mercy, but because Augustus studied him like one might study an artifact suspected to be stolen. Elijah's every movement was watched. Every word he spoke was weighed. Never had the estate seen a man like him, calm yet dangerous, gentle yet powerful, silent yet full of unspoken storms. At night, in the workers' quarters, Elijah often sat alone beneath the open window. He listened to the distant river, the rustle of leaves, the muffled conversations of other enslaved men who didn't know whether to trust him or fear what he represented. He didn't blame them. His presence placed them at risk, but his mission, the secret he carried, demanded silence for now. Sometimes he closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. The ship that carried him, the men who attacked, the documents stolen, the promise he made to his father. Never let the truth die. Never let silence win. And now, the truth was buried somewhere in this city. He just needed time. Time to discover who held the key to his stolen freedom. Time to understand why fate had placed Claire Beaumont in his path. Claire, meanwhile, found herself thinking of him far more than she should have. She tried to distract herself with chores, preparing tonics, sewing clothes for the workers' children, assisting in the gardens, reading in the quiet of her room. But none of it quieted her mind. Why did Elijah feel familiar? Why did his presence unsettle her so deeply? And why did she believe him so easily when he said he had been born free? One afternoon, after wrestling with her thoughts for hours, she carried a basket of medicinal herbs toward the worker courtyard. As she walked, she noticed Elijah alone near the well, pulling up water with slow, steady movements. She hesitated, took a breath, then walked toward him. He didn't look up until she was near. When he did, she felt that same strange recognition peeling back layers inside her heart. "You shouldn't be here," Elijah said softly. "I know," Claire replied, "but I'm here anyway." A hint of a smile touched Elijah's lips, the first she had seen. She placed the basket on the well's edge and reached for a handful of herbs, needing something to occupy her shaking hands. "Elijah, what happened to you?" she asked quietly. He looked away. "It is not safe for you to know." She frowned. "Safe from what?" "From the truth," Elijah whispered, "and the people who buried it." Claire's stomach tightened. "My father." "No," Elijah said gently. "Your father is many things, but he is not the man who stole my life." "Then who?" Elijah stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Someone powerful enough to erase names." to forge chains for those never meant to wear them. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. He continued, before I was taken, I carried something valuable, something dangerous. He swallowed. Documents. What kind of documents? She whispered. Documents proving my freedom, Elijah said, and proving a criminal arrangement between certain men in this city, men who profit by selling free people under false names. Claire's eyes widened. You're saying someone has been kidnapping free men, not just men, Elijah whispered painfully. Families, children, anyone whose disappearance can be buried beneath lies and profit. Claire stepped back, hand covering her mouth. Elijah, that's monstrous. It is truth, he said, and truth rarely hides for long. Their eyes locked. You believe me, Elijah whispered. Yes, Claire answered without hesitation. He let out a breath that trembled with relief, gratitude, and sorrow. But you must be careful, Elijah warned. If anyone discovers you're helping me, I haven't offered to help you, Claire interrupted softly, but she had. Her eyes had already promised it. Her heart had already moved toward it. Her courage had already awakened because of him. Elijah studied her for a long moment. You're braver than you appear, he said. And you're not what you appear, she replied. He nodded. Because I cannot be. That night, rain fell over the estate, soft at first, then heavy enough to drown out the usual nighttime sounds. Claire lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, feeling the storm echo inside her. What Elijah said was impossible, and yet nothing about him felt like a lie. All her life, Claire had lived within boundaries drawn by her father, by society, by expectations. But Elijah, with his impossible secret, his quietly burning eyes, his calm strength, had pushed her beyond one of those boundaries, and she didn't want to return. The storm kept her awake, so she wandered to the balcony, watching the rain fall in shimmering sheets. Down below, in the dark courtyard, she spotted a faint silhouette sitting near the worker house, still, unmoving, as if carved from the night itself. Elijah. Even the rain couldn't wash away the aura around him, the quiet nobility, the heavy sadness, the fire beneath the calm. Claire pressed her hand to her chest. Why do you feel familiar? She whispered to the storm. Below, Elijah lifted his head, and though Claire knew he couldn't see her in the darkness, she felt as if he sensed her anyway. The next morning brought muddy paths, dripping leaves, and the smell of damp earth. Workers trudged through the fields. The overseers shouted instructions. Life returned to normal, but nothing was normal, not anymore. Claire moved through the estate with a new awareness, watching, listening, noticing details she had ignored before. The hushed conversations between overseers, the unexplained shipments delivered late at night, the record her father kept locked in his study. Secrets lived everywhere on the estate, and Elijah's presence sharpened them. Later that afternoon, Claire found Elijah near the old sycamore tree at the far edge of the property, a quiet place where the workers rested during breaks. She approached slowly. Heart pounding, Elijah, she said softly. He turned. I've been thinking, Claire continued, trying to steady her voice. You said someone in this city holds your documents, someone dangerous. Yes, Elijah said. Do you know who? He hesitated for a long, painful moment. Then yes, he whispered, I know his name. Claire felt her breath catch. Who is he? Elijah looked toward the horizon where the city's spires glinted faintly under the sun. Silas Rourke, he said, a name Claire recognized. Her blood ran cold. Silas Rourke, the shipping magnate, a man her father occasionally dealt with, a man known for wealth but not integrity, a man rumored to have shadowy dealings along the docks. Elijah, if this is true, it is true, he said firmly, and he will kill to protect it. Claire swallowed hard. Elijah, she whispered, what are you going to do? He met her gaze, fire in his eyes now. Find the documents, he said. Prove who I am, expose what they've done, and reclaim my name. Claire stepped closer, heart hammering. And what do you want from me? Elijah searched her face, his voice soft but steady. Not obedience, he said, not pity, not loyalty. He paused. Truth. I need someone who sees truth. Claire's breath trembled, and in that moment, with the sycamore leaves rustling above them and the distant echoes of the estate humming softly, something irreversible formed between them, a fragile, dangerous bond, born not of romance, not yet, but of recognition, of courage, of destiny, and neither of them could walk away. That night, Claire made the decision that would change everything. She slipped into her father's library when the house fell quiet. Candlelight flickered against shelves of aging books and locked drawers. Her hands trembled as she approached the heavy desk. She hesitated only once, then reached for the ledger her father guarded most carefully, the one containing names, dates, transactions, and the Beaumont family's dealings with Silas Rourke. As she opened the book, the floor creaked behind her. She spun. Elijah stood in the doorway, soaked from the rain, breathless from running, eyes wide with urgency. "Claire," he whispered. "He knows." "Who?" she asked. Elijah stepped forward, voice shaking for the first time since she met him. "Silas Rourke. Someone told him you spoke to me." A beat of silence. "He's coming." Claire's heart thudded painfully. The storm she felt earlier was no longer metaphor. It was real. It was close. It was coming for both of them. Elijah held out his hand. "Come with me," he said, and Claire, without fear, without hesitation, without looking back, placed her hand in his. Two souls drawn together across borders they didn't choose. Two truths colliding in a world built on silence. Two hearts beginning to awaken to something greater than fear. And somewhere in the shadows of New Orleans, a powerful man prepared to destroy them both. Because Elijah Navarro, the man the city believed it owned, was about to reveal the first crack in the chains that had held countless lives hostage. And Claire Beaumont, the girl who saw him clearly, would become the unexpected protector of the truth he carried. The day the truth came for them began with a silence so heavy, it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. New Orleans had grown louder around them in the weeks since the riot. More shouting in the streets, more fear, more whispers about the slave with the golden face, the boy who stood against a mob, the miracle child the city couldn't break. Some said Elias was cursed. Some said he was blessed, and some, only a few, but enough, said he was a sign that the world was about to change. Elias wanted none of that. He wanted only one thing, Amaya safe. He would trade every miracle they claimed he possessed if it meant she could live free. That morning, as the pale sunlight crept over the rooftops, Elias walked with a careful quietness through the small servant quarters behind the doctor's house. Amaya sat on the wooden step outside her room, her hands trembling around the thread she was trying to weave into the blue ribbon she always wore. The ribbon she had said belonged to someone she never named. Elias didn't have to ask what troubled her. He already knew, because everything had changed after the riot, because New Orleans was not the kind of city that forgave a slave who saved white men's lives by defying them. Because the auction houses were talking again, and because Amaya had been visited the night before by a stranger who said something that had broken her. Elias sat beside her quietly. Her breath was shaking. She didn't look at him. He leaned forward just enough so his shoulder touched hers, a gesture small enough not to frighten her, yet strong enough to remind her she wasn't alone. "Tell me," he whispered. Her voice came out in pieces, sharp, fragile pieces that sounded like they cut her throat on the way out. "They know," she said. "Someone found out." He felt it instantly, cold, deep, rising like water around his ribs. One word whispered by every enslaved person in the South. "Who found out?" Elias asked, though he already feared the answer. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. "Your secret," she whispered, "the one they could kill you for." And just like that, the world narrowed. The birds stopped singing, the street noise blurred into a distant hum, and the air felt tight like a hand closing around his throat. He had spent his entire life hiding one truth. One impossible, dangerous, unforgivable truth, taught to him by a woman he barely remembered, but whose warnings had carved themselves into him like scripture. A truth that made the slave traders furious, a truth that made the auctioneer stare at him too long, a truth that made white men whisper behind gloved hands, a truth Amaya had seen from the very first moment. "You are not what they think you are," she told him on that first day, "and someday that will either save you or destroy you. Now, maybe it would do both." Elias took a slow breath, then a deeper one. "Who knows?" he asked again. Amaya looked up at last. Her eyes were more than scared. They were resigned. Asher Beaumont. The name drained the warmth out of the morning. Asher Beaumont wasn't just any man. He was the city's most ruthless trader, the man who supplied half the French Quarter with slaves. He was wealthy enough to bribe judges, cruel enough to break men for sport, and arrogant enough to believe he owned the world. He had tried to buy Elias at the auction. He had lost, and he had never forgotten. Amaya, Elias whispered. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. He came last night, she said. He told the doctor he'd learned something worth money. He said he would return today with proof. Elias didn't ask what proof. He already knew. There was only one thing Asher Beaumont could have found, and it was the one thing Elias had prayed would stay buried. He stood slowly, the boards beneath his feet creaking. Amaya rose with him, clutching the blue ribbon so tightly it looked like she might tear it in half. What do we do? She asked. Elias turned toward the gate. We tell the truth, he said. She grabbed his arm. Elias, truth doesn't protect people like us. He looked at her then, fully, deeply, the way he had only dared a handful of times. He brushed a loose curl from her cheek, letting his fingers linger for a moment longer than he should. Maybe not, he whispered, but lies have never saved us either. She swallowed hard, but there was something fierce in her eyes now, something that made him feel braver than he was. If you go to the doctor, she said, you go alone. He'll trust you more without me. He hated the idea. But she was right. He nodded once slowly, and with that, he walked toward the doctor's office, carrying the weight of a truth he had never spoken aloud. A truth some men would kill to keep hidden, and some men would kill to sell. Dr. Caldwell sat at his desk, fingers wrapped around a glass he hadn't touched, staring at the wall with an expression Elias had never seen on him before. Fear, real fear. He didn't look up when Elias stepped inside. He didn't speak. Elias closed the door quietly. You know, Elias said gently. The doctor inhaled deeply, too deeply, like a man preparing for a blow. Yes, he whispered, I know. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elias asked the question he had run from all his life. How much? Dr. Caldwell's voice cracked. The trader told me that he found your mother's papers, birth records, letters. He pressed a shaking hand against his forehead. It is impossible, Elias, impossible. And yet, the doctor looked up then, and in that moment Elias knew the truth was no longer a rumor. It was real, it was alive, and it was dangerous. Your mother, the doctor said slowly, was not a slave. Silence slammed between them. Elias didn't breathe, didn't move. She was a free woman, the doctor continued, a French woman from the St. Mitchell family. Elias felt his heart stutter. He had suspected, he had wondered, but hearing it said aloud, she was taken, the doctor whispered, by a man who forged documents, sold her as property, erased her name, and hid what he had done. She was pregnant when she arrived, with you. Elias felt the room tilt. Everything he had lived, every scar, every beating, every chain, every auction block, suddenly became something else, something worse. He had not been born into slavery. He had been stolen into it. But the worst part, the doctor's voice broke. Is that the man who did this still lives? Elias looked up sharply. Who? He whispered. Dr. Caldwell did not answer at first. His hands clenched, his jaw tightened, his breath shuddered. At last he whispered the name. Asher Beaumont. The world roared into Elias's ears. His stomach tightened, his fists curled, and his vision narrowed into something sharp and dangerous. My mother. Elias whispered. Did he kill her? The doctor shook his head. She died giving birth, but what Beaumont did, what he hid, if the authorities believed it, if the French consulate believed it, he leaned forward urgently. Elias, this could change everything. You were never legally a slave. You are, by law, a free man. The words didn't feel real. Free, a word he had never spoken without irony, a word he had never even allowed himself to imagine. He felt it like a shock, too bright, too painful to touch. So that is why Beaumont wants me silenced, Elias said. The doctor nodded. And that, he whispered, is why you must leave New Orleans today, before he comes with the papers, before he kills you. Elias shook his head slowly. No, he said, I won't run. The doctor stood quickly. You must. You have no army, no power, no protection. I have truth. Elias said. The doctor slammed his fist on the desk. Truth does not win against men like Beaumont. Elias looked at him with something new in his eyes. Something unbreakable. Then let it lose, he whispered, but it will not lose quietly. When Elias stepped outside again, Amaya was already there. Her eyes scanned his face desperately. What did he say? Elias didn't answer in words. He walked toward her, put a hand gently on her cheek, and said quietly, You were right. Her breath shook. All this time, she whispered. He nodded. And now the whole city may learn the truth. Her voice trembled. Then you can be free. He looked at her, really looked, and shook his head. Free means nothing without you. She drew in a sharp breath. For a heartbeat they stood too close, too still, too hopeful. But hope was dangerous, and time was running out. A shout cut across the street. 4 men were walking toward the house, armed, confident, and led by the last man Elias wanted to see. His boots struck the dirt like hammer blows. His coat swung behind him like a black flag, and in his hand was a folded paper sealed in red wax. Proof. Amia grabbed Elias's arm. Run, she whispered. Elias didn't move. Beaumont stopped a few feet away. Well, Beaumont drawled, isn't this poetic? The boy with the face of an angel and the blood of a criminal. Elias said nothing. Beaumont smiled coldly. You think saving that silly little girl at the riot made you a hero? He tapped the paper. All it did was make you valuable. Elias clenched his fists. Beaumont's smile sharpened. You are not a slave, he said loudly in front of everyone. You are stolen property, and I will make sure you pay for what your mother cost me. The street fell silent. People gathered. Servants peeked out. The doctor appeared in the doorway, paling at the sight. Elias stepped forward, and he spoke a sentence he had never dared to speak. Read it, he said. Beaumont blinked. Read it aloud, the crowd murmured. Elias lifted his chin. If it proves what you say, then let the city hear it. Beaumont hesitated, because fear did not live in Elias's eyes, because they both knew why. Beaumont had 2 choices now: read it and admit Elias was never a slave, exposing his own crime, or refuse to read it and look like a liar in front of witnesses. Cornering a wolf was one thing, cornering a wolf with its teeth bared was another. After a long moment, Beaumont broke the seal. His voice shook as he read. Birth certificate of Elias Saint Mitchell, born free, son of Camille Saint Mitchell of Lyon, France. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Beaumont swallowed. Unlawfully sold into slavery at 5 years old. Elias stared at him without blinking. Beaumont's throat tightened. He lowered the paper. The street was frozen, and then a single voice broke the silence. It was Amia. Her voice rang out with a strength Elias had never heard from her. Then let him walk free. The crowd murmured. The doctor stepped forward. Others gathered behind Elias, slowly, hesitantly, but undeniably. Beaumont saw it happen. He saw control slipping. He saw the power shifting. He saw a truth he could no longer bury. His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed, and with a sudden fury he raised his gun. Everything happened at once. Amia screamed, the crowd scattered, the doctor lunged, and Elias stepped forward without fear. He had lived his entire life running from a truth he never chose. Now he ran toward it. Beaumont fired. But the bullet never reached Elias, because Amia, small, trembling, brave beyond sense, threw herself between them. The shot tore through her shoulder. Elias caught her as she fell. No, Amia, his voice broke. Her blood warmed his hands. She looked up at him, eyes wet but shining. You're free, she whispered. Elias pressed his forehead against hers. So are you, he whispered fiercely. I swear it. The crowd surged. Someone tackled Beaumont. Someone else grabbed his gun. The doctor rushed to Amia's side. Elias carried her into the house, refusing to let go. Hours later, the city guards arrived. Beaumont was arrested. His papers were seized, and the French consulate demanded an inquiry. By sundown, the decision was clear. Elias was a free man, legally, permanently, irrefutably, but Elias stayed at Amia's bedside. The doctor stitched her wound. She survived, barely. When she finally woke, Elias was there, holding her hand. Her voice was faint. You didn't leave, she whispered. He shook his head. You saved my life, he said. Now I will spend mine saving yours. She smiled weakly. What will you do now? He looked at her with the same steady courage that had driven him to face Beaumont in the street. I will find others, he said. Others like me. Others stolen, hidden, forgotten. I will tell their stories. I will break their chains the way truth broke mine. Amia squeezed his hand. And me, she whispered. Elias touched the blue ribbon in her hair. You, he said softly, will never be left behind again. Tears filled her eyes. Not even if the world tries to pull us apart. Elias leaned close, his voice a promise carved in stone. Not even then. Years later, people still talked about the boy whose truth overturned an empire of lies. Some said he became an activist. Some said he traveled the country exposing stolen children. Some said he married the girl who saw through chains. all agreed on one thing: he changed the world because he refused to let the world change him. And whenever someone asked Elias what gave him the strength to stand in front of a man like Beaumont, to demand truth, to face death without fear, he told them the same answer: because someone believed in my freedom even before I believed in it myself. And if they asked who that someone was, he always smiled and said only, a girl with a blue ribbon and a braver heart than mine.